Cheers. It really should be scotch up here. I really
Yes.
wish they would make that a tradition.
Yes, we could use it. Okay. The sympathizer begins with the narrator identifying himself as a spook, a spy, a sleeper. At the end of his confession, he writes of awaking. So, you slept in my class, which I did not see. You might have slept with your eyes open.
I have another story, by the way.
Oh, okay. Go
But you
ahead.
can finish the question, then I'll tell the story.
Okay. Well, you inscribed my copy of The Sympathizer saying, like my narrator, I took a long time to wake up. Please speak to us about waking. And is it like becoming conscious? Is it like enlightenment?
The other story, okay, is that at the end of the semester, I don't know if you remember this, but I think you wrote all the students a note.
Yeah.
Right, and so I have the note. It's a page long. And in the note, it acknowledges that I was asleep. So I think you did notice, you kindly have forgotten over time. And the final recommendation is that Cal has excellent counseling services. You should make use of them. Which is actually accurate. But you know what? I never made use of the counseling services. I became a writer instead. It's much cheaper. But for me, to become a writer, which took a long time. I think it took 20 years before I could call myself a writer. 20 years of writing and struggling. And that was a process of waking up. Not just waking up intellectually, which I had already begun at Berkeley in your class and in many other classes. I was struck by intellectual lightning and political lightning at Berkeley. I became radicalized, became an Asian American, became politically committed. So I thought I was awake, because that's what it means to be woke, right? And that's the metaphor that's in the novel and that is so often used to describe the coming into political consciousness. But what I wasn't awake to was my emotions. That's a different kind of awakening. And that's why the reason I was falling asleep in your class was because I was going out and doing all this political activism and staying up late and didn't have the energy for the class. And that was probably because I was also avoiding what it is that writing provokes, which is not simply political consciousness, but emotional consciousness. And so I think that has been really crucial for me as a writer to try to figure out how to do these two things at the same time. That one of the reasons why revolutions fail is because they're all about politics and they're not enough about emotions. And that's what the ending of The Sympathizer is about. He recognizes that to become a revolutionary, you have to have sympathy for people. You have to feel for people who are lacking justice. And then you come into power as a revolutionary, and then you want to enact justice, and you have to stop feeling for people because you have to put them in re-education camps or execute them or whatever. That's the contradiction at the heart of the novel, and also at the heart of my own struggle to become a writer as well, to talk about politics and emotions at the same time.
But how does writing get the emotions flowing? Because for me, emotions come first, and the emotions are chaotic and wordless. And my task is to find the words for them. But the way I hear you speak, the writing evokes emotion. How does that work?
I think our process is very different, and it's probably grounded in who I am as a person, my inclination to be political, my inclination to be academic, and then all the schooling that I did to get a PhD. It's hard to remove that from me, and so I think I did approach writing rationally. Like when writing the refugees, for example, I had an Excel sheet where I said, okay, I have a story about a woman, I have to have a story about a man, older person, younger person. So it was very politically, it was very consciously crafted, and so was The Sympathizer. And, in terms of writing, what I had to do was to try to, get deep enough into a character or a story to find the emotions that are there. But I didn't start with the emotions. And so for me, I'm still learning how to do that. And it's through becoming a father, which has tapped into all kinds of emotions I didn't know I had through meeting other writers. I did this reading with Ocean Vuong at the LA Public Library. He's a great poet, by the way. The Night Sky as Exit Wounds. You really should read his book, and you should really see him in person. You should bring him here to Lannan, because when I saw him read and speak, he's very emotional. That's who he is. That was very powerful. But I've always, it's been a lifetime trying to repress that, because to allow the emotions come out. You saw that. I was like, this is a new thing for me, to talk about my parents, to let myself feel that emotion on stage, because it's very scary. It's very frightening for me, because I've spent a lifetime trying to contain those emotions, and to be a writer means to try to excavate them.
The last sentence in The Sympathizer, "We will live." It's in italics. It's an exclamation point. We will live. So at the end of the book, the refugees are on a boat. They're at sea. We don't know what will become of them. And then throughout the book, there's spies and counter spies and counter spies, frenemies, and they're betraying one another, they're torturing one another. So to me, that sentence, "We will live," it rings out of nowhere. Where does it come from? And where does that hope come from?
Once I submitted a story to the Atlantic Monthly, and the fiction editor wrote back and said, "Where's the hope in this story?"
Yeah, well.
And I was like, "Why do you need hope? This is some kind of silly humanistic ideal." And so when I reached the end of The Sympathizer, I thought, "Oh shoot, where's the hope in this book?"
So you shoehorned it in?
Right.
Oh,
yes.
That's a phrase that I learned from my editor.
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, you just shoehorned that thing in."
Yes, but there is a dramatic justification for it. I felt like, yes, it is me, the author, putting that in, but in the guise of this character, the sympathizer. And basically, by the end of the novel, he's a destroyed person. He's not healthy. So we spend 90% of the novel watching him gradually unravel and be destroyed. And then in the last chapter, he's trying to put himself back together. There's no way he's going to be able to put himself back together in the space of a few months after what's happened to him, right? But he is trying. He's trying to hold himself together, all these fragments that now have been blown up. And so that last line, "We will live," that's his attempt to be hopeful. And it's meant to be desperate, because he's trying to hang on to this last fragment of hope before he gets on that refugee boat and sets out on the open sea for a journey that he knows is at best a 50-50 chance. But he has to tell himself that. We have to tell ourselves that. If we actually think about the forces that we're confronting, we have to tell ourselves that.
Yeah, I like your explaining it to me in this sort of non-poetic layman's language. And I think it's a wonderful way to end that book, because it's mysterious. We don't know where it comes from, and it forces us to try to work it out. Okay, now I'm going to ask you a question that's sort of like, it's a question I would have asked you in class.
I'll try to do better this time.
Yes. He never spoke in class. And
so you do remember.
Yes, I do remember. I do remember.
Oh, yeah.
But that's not the same as being asleep. Not talking.
Actually,
is not the same.
Now I remember the letter was actually much more cutting than that, because you actually said that you did not say a word in class.
That's true. You did,
and I didn't. And you said you have to give more of yourself to your fellow students, and
yes,
you were right.
Yes, I did.
But I was also very shy.
Yeah.
And now look at me. Yeah.
So you might remember that in this class, which was called Reading for Writers, I assigned William Carlos Williams in The American Grain. Did you read it?
I did. I did. There were 4 books, and I read all 4 of them.
Oh, very good. Okay.
But I didn't get it. I did not get it.
Okay.
In The American Grain.
So in the book, William Carlos Williams has he gives the mythic history of America, and he has Ponce de Leon comes to the Caribbean, and he just slaughters the Caribs, and he unpeoples those islands. And Williams is saying the people that were slaughtered, they had a language. How can you do this? And there's a bloody scene where they're fighting at sea, and the dogs are the water is churning with blood, and the dogs are killed. The sharks are there, women, babies, and blood. And William says, "We are the slaughterers." And then he says, "Do these things die? Men who do not know what lives are themselves dead. In the heart there are living Indians, once slaughtered and defrauded. Do these things die?" And then you come up with this book, which I thought, William Carlos Williams asked the question, do these things die? And Viet Thanh Nguyen, nothing ever dies. Okay, so was that your answer to Williams? And tell us about your way of thinking of history.
You know, I think now that I'm a teacher too, I can say we as teachers have to believe that sometimes we plant a seed in students and it'll grow later, even if they don't know it, that the seed was planted. So no, I don't remember that scene from William Carlos Williams in the American Grave. And you know what? But I remember the book.
The question, do these things die?
I don't remember any of that. But you know what? I remember the book because in writing Nothing Ever Dies, I actually went and got the William Carlos Williams book in the American Grain, and I thought, I'm going to have to reread this book. And then I ran out of time, so I didn't reread it. Now I will. But I think the point is that it must have stayed with me. You know, as writers, we absorb all kinds of things that we don't know. This is my excuse. It must have stayed with me. I did read it. I saw the words, and somehow they lodged somewhere in the back of my mind. But also William Carlos Williams, you know, you and he and Toni Morrison are asking some of the same questions. You're investigating the same history. Even if you're dealing with Chinese Americans or Chinese immigrants, you're investigating the same America that he's talking about, and so is Toni Morrison, right? So and I'm a part of that quest too, which is why I could turn to Toni Morrison and get Nothing Ever Dies out of Beloved. Right? And I don't think that's a coincidence, that this is the group of writers that I affiliate with. You, Morrison, William Carlos Williams, people who acknowledge ourselves as Americans, but not just for the American dream, but for the blood as well.
So you named your son Ellison. Is it because of your admiration for the African American writers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I was at Berkeley, I took African American literature with Professor Barbara Christian. I don't know if you knew her.
Oh, yes, I do.
She was incredible. Yes. She was incredible, you know. And I learned so much in that class, just as I learned so much in all the ethnic studies courses on Chicano literature, Asian American literature, and so on that I took. But African American literature made a particular impression on me because of the combination of anger, critique, and art that was happening in that tradition. And the peak of that in her class for me was Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. And I wrote a very long paper on Invisible Man for her in that class. And that book made such a huge impression because I thought it was narratively a great read, and politically it was very, very compelling. And so I thought somewhere in me at that time, I thought maybe one day I could hope to aspire to write something like this. And so when it came time to plot The Sympathizer and to try to figure out what the architecture of the book was, I very much thought about Invisible Man. And then I went and reread Invisible Man. And then I realized I still love that book, but I also disagree with it too, with the maturity or the difference in me of being 20 years older. And the difference was that, in Invisible Man, it's about a guy, young man, who is an African-American everyman. And he goes through his political consciousness and then his disillusionment. And then he retreats into a hole. And then he emerges at the end of the book thinking he has something to contribute after all as an individual. And I thought that's where I disagree with Ralph Ellison. I think this is one reason why Invisible Man was as recognized as it was in the 1950s, because it spoke to the political mood of the day that had grappled with communism and rejected it in favor of the American individual. And I knew that in writing The Sympathizer, I was dealing with some of the same territory about a communist idealist who's going to be disillusioned. And the ending that the American publishing industry wanted from me was to say, at the end, goodbye communism, hello America. That was the end. And I wasn't going to give them that.
Did they actually advise you to how to end that book?
No one is so crass as to say something like that. But
they do it subtly? Or?
yeah, and as a scholar and as a critic, I read the signs. I read the evidence, and the evidence is 13 out of 14 publishers rejected the manuscript, right? And including the editor who edited another Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, The Orphan Master's Son, which has something of the same plot. And The Orphan Master's Son is written for Americans. It's about North Koreans, but it's written for Americans. Because at the end, it's North Korean communism is terrible, American dream is good. And that book came out while I was writing The Sympathizer. And I like that book a lot. Narratively, it's a great read. But ideologically, I completely disagree with it.
So these 14 times that you sent it out, did you send the same manuscript out, or did you change it before the next one? And did you change it before somebody actually accepted it?
That's an interesting alternate universe. That would have been really a miserable experience and would have tested my integrity. But no, what we did was my agent sent it out to all these editors who he had handpicked. He's a very smart agent. He thought, these are the editors who are most likely to like your book for what it is. And then on one day he said, this is the auction. And then we're going to wait, and we're going to wait to see what people say. And he warned me in advance. He said, sometimes these auctions happen and nobody bids on the book. And I said, okay, I understand that's the reality. But inside of me, I thought, no, that's not going to happen. And so, okay, here's more backstory. So I love Ellison, right, Ralph Ellison. And so there was a deadline for finishing my novel, which was that my wife was going to give birth. And I finished the first draft of the novel 2 days before my son was born, and we named him Ellison, very deliberately after Ralph Ellison and African-American literature. So my son, 3 months old at the time that we send this book out, I had the morning shift. So I would revise the novel until about 3 in the morning while I'm watching over this lump. That's my son. It's a lump. Doesn't do much. And then 3 a.m. I would start drinking scotch. 5 a.m. I would fall asleep and my wife would take over. Anyway, so that's my schedule. When we send the book out, the manuscript out. And I thought, okay, I'm going to fall asleep at 5 in the morning. And then when I get up, it'll be like 1 or 2 in the afternoon, and that'll be like 4 or 5 p.m. New York time, and the auction will be over, okay? But my son, of course, chooses that day to be really disturbing and wakes me up at 10 in the morning. So I'm in bed from 10 until about 2 as the rejections come in one by one. And my agent, bless his heart, sends each one to me, okay? And so it's like, this is the worst day of my, almost the worst, possibly the worst day of my life. No one says it's because it doesn't affirm the American dream, but when they say stuff like, I couldn't crawl into the voice of this character, or I just didn't like the language, I think they're, it's hard to not to think that I didn't give them the happy ending, the hopeful ending, which is the American ending that Americans want.
So then you put in italics, we will live. That's it. So does Ellison also have a Vietnamese name?
Ellison Nguyen. Dung is the last name of his mother. Dai means fortune. No, wait, what does it mean? No, Dai means talent in Vietnamese. And my dad didn't like that name, you know. And I thought, why? I went through all this effort to come up with a Vietnamese name for him, you know. And I don't know. I think maybe we understand the name literally, but you know, we don't understand what it means connotatively. However, maybe it's like, you know, maybe it's an old-fashioned Vietnamese name, and he didn't want that. We thought it meant literary talent, but I think it means financial talent.
Oh. Well, it could be both.
Hopefully.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, then now my husband Earl, he wants to ask this question. He's just delighted by an image that you have in one of your short stories. And so there's it's in Saigon, and we are seeing the streets, and there are lots of street businesses going on, and there is a masseur. Is that the same as a masseuse? Is it
Male
same
version.
thing?
Yeah, I think so.
Masseur. Mm-hmm. And he advertises his business by having he's shaking a bottle, and there's pebbles inside. So, and Earl finds that just delightful. I do too. And did you make that up? Did you witness it? Do they actually do that? And also, what I wonder is, what does shaking that bottle have to do with massage?
So I got to Vietnam, and I think the second time I was there, we stayed for 7 months. And I would see, at night only, by the way, at night I would see these young men, you know, neatly dressed, slacks, white shirt, riding their bicycles on the streets, shaking this bottle with the pebbles in it. I was like, what is that? I don't know what that means. And there were many things in Vietnam I did not understand the meaning of. And I finally figured it out when I went out onto the street once, and I saw one of these men had parked his bike, put down his bottle, and he had spread a reed mat onto the sidewalk, and there was another guy lying on that reed mat with his shirt off, and the other man was giving him the massage. And I thought, that is so Vietnamese. This totally makes sense to me, you know. And it was such a vivid detail that embodied the country at that time, and possibly still does, about just what people had to do in order to survive, and the makeshift ways in which they found ways to make a living.
But what about the bottle?
Well, that was how they announced that they were traveling through the area, and that was their call.
It was to make a sound.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
and it's for other businesses too?
I only saw it with those guys. Oh. And maybe there was, I don't know, maybe there's another business underneath that? I have no idea. No.
Well, I heard you tell Terry Gross that you're not good at having fun. Mm-hmm. And is that true? And can you tell us one fun thing that you have done lately?
No, I am not good at having fun. I blame my parents, you know, devout Catholics who...
Oh, did you hear her say, oh dear?
Yeah, well, you know, one day my son will say, I blame my dad for whatever it is. And, you know, but devout Catholic, you have to understand, Vietnamese Catholics are a special breed of Catholic. Special breed of Catholic. My parents were born in the same region as Ho Chi Minh. And that region is famous for producing hardcore revolutionaries and hardcore Catholics. So my life could have taken a different direction, but whatever direction it took, I would have turned out hardcore. And so I grew up just watching them not having fun, just working all the time and sacrificing themselves one way or another to God or to capitalism. And I've absorbed that spirit. So even though I'm pretty much an atheist, I work really, really hard. And when I don't work hard, I feel really bad, you know. And so I can, you know, the last fun thing I did was probably go out on a date with my wife. I do but it's part of work. It's in the calendar, have a date with my wife, 3 hours, we'll go to dinner, hire the babysitter. That's as much fun as I can allow myself.
I did hear you use the word fun at the beginning of your talk, and it was something about the fun of writing The Sympathizer.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I enjoyed it. Oh, but okay, but in order to get to the fun, let me put it into context. I had to work really, really hard. So I set out to write short stories at Berkeley as an undergraduate because I thought, oh, they're short, that'll be easy. And so I graduated from Berkeley. I became a professor in '97. In the summer before I started being a professor, I thought, okay, I'm going to get serious about writing short stories. I'm going to write a short story collection. I wrote an entire short story collection in 3 months. And then it would take 17 years to revise that short story collection. And almost none of it was fun. 99%. It basically sucked, okay? I mean, it was just like, the only pleasure I ever got was like when one of these stories would be accepted for publication. That was about it. But everything was drudgery and agony and misery and despair. I'm not even exaggerating. It was really, 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 really hard. Like the black-eyed women story, the one that I read, 50 drafts over 17 years.
Yeah.
And this is not unusual for writers. I mean, this happens to many of us, right? And so that was that. But I was a good Catholic. I thought, Jesus Christ died on the cross. I can write this for 17 years. And it's like that's what good Catholics say to themselves to justify whatever it is that they're going through, right? But the reward came, which is then my agent got the collection and said, hey, I love the collection, but you got to write a novel. Because short story collections don't sell in New York City. I said, fine, I'll write a novel. And it was fun to write. It was really, really fun to write. 2 years, and mostly it was a lot of pleasure. Even writing the torture scenes was fun. I had some sleepless nights imagining what was going on. But I have to say, as a technical challenge, how do I do this? It was fun, and I enjoyed it.
Oh, I got to tell you about your torture scenes. Okay, so I wrote a blurb for your book and gave you praise, and I never confessed to anybody. I mean, I just gave the impression that I had read the whole book. I skipped the torture scenes.
I know.
How do you know?
You said it in an interview.
Oh, I did. I confessed.
Yeah, you did.
I confessed to the New York Times.
I think so.
I told them
so.
I didn't read the torture scenes. Yeah.
So now we're even.
Yeah, okay, we're even. Okay, so I am like you. I don't have fun either. And, but I'm having fun right now.
Good, I'm glad. We've come full circle.
Well, are you?
I am, it's fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you too. So now do we walk awkwardly off the stage? Yes. That's what I think is what we're doing.